What's up everybody, it's Priyon Joni. So in my last video, I tried to do a quick, but it turned out to be 20-minute long first look of Pioneer DJ's newest battle mixer, the DJM-S11. And as I browsed YouTube to check out all the other reviews, I saw a lot of other first look videos that were at least 30 minutes long. There's a lot in this mixer to unpack, so today we're gonna go in depth with all the features of the DJM-S11. But first, a word from our sponsor, Direct Music Service. DMS is an online database for working DJs and mix artists. It's the one-stop shop where you can get your music from for your gigs. It's a searchable, organized database with thousands of edits, remixes, and different versions of your favorite tracks from many different genres. What's also awesome about Direct Music Service, if you're always on the road just like me, they have this awesome mobile app so that you can search your favorite tunes, put them on a wish list, and they'll be ready for you on your Dropbox folder when you get home. You can now save some money and get a discount using one of these two coupon codes. Use the code PJMonthly and get 30% off your first month off any monthly subscription. Use the coupon code PJYearly and get 10% off your entire first year of any yearly subscription. Go to directmusicservice.com today to sign up. So there might be a few topics that I covered in the last video that I'm going to reiterate here or elaborate on, just in case this is the first video on the S11 that you've seen from me. All right, so last time I went top to bottom, we're going to go bottom up, and we're going to spend some time on each one of the features. All right, so starting with the Crossfader. So compared to the DJM-S9, the Crossfader has been improved. There's 30% less movement forward and backward. If you actually touch it, it doesn't wobble. So you can feel that it's actually stronger. It's made to be stronger so that the stem is more resistant to breaking off. It's very smooth, very quiet. And just like on the DJM-S9, you can change the bumpers to either a softer rubber or the plastic ones for that louder click. But right now, the default ones that are in there are my favorite. Because it's so smooth, I actually use the feeling adjust cranked all the way up. And when I want a little bit more give, I probably bring it down to about 12 o'clock. So along with the fader, the paint is actually more durable as well. It's made to withstand from peeling around the Crossfader or around the performance pads. It comes in two paint schemes. There's the DJM-S11 and the DJM-S11 Special Edition. The Special Edition paint job is the one I have here, and it's based on the classic DJM-909 mixer from 2003. The reason for the callback to the classic DJM-909 is because that was the first battle mixer with an onboard touchscreen. The touchscreen is not the only feature in the DJM-S11 that came from the 909. There's actually features inside borrowed from the 909. And you saw the opening of the video where I powered it up, and there's that little Easter egg of the Special Edition booting up with the familiar DJM-909 boot up screen. Well, that's exclusive to the Special Edition. All other features, including the 909 features, are all inside this mixer. So next, as we move up the mixer, there's this new button called Smooth Echo. The way Smooth Echo works is that it's a global echo that affects your channels, your crossfader, and it's triggered by two things. It can be triggered with just the cutoff of the crossfader, or additionally, it can be triggered by leaving the crossfader open for a specific beat duration, then the cutoff. So if you're using the crossfader fast, it might not engage the Smooth Echo. But when you leave it on for a little bit and then cut it off, then the Smooth Echo engages. The reason for this is because sometimes DJs who are scratching or want to do an echo effect wish they had a third hand to engage the echo on the paddle. Well, we don't have three hands. Some DJs trigger their echo right at the last part of their phrase by engaging the on-off of the echo using a foot switch. Smooth Echo is an alternative to that. So right now I'm going to turn on Smooth Echo. And when I scratch, you don't hear an echo, but when I cut it off, the echo carries on. When it's open, you don't hear it, but then you hear it come on right after. Now, what if you want to scratch around and you don't want to hear the echo while you're scratching? So what you can do is you can hold down the smooth echo button and it opens the smooth echo settings. And there's this one setting called number of beats to trigger by. And right now it's set to 0, and you can set it to 1/2. So it won't trigger unless you leave the crossfader open for at least half a beat. So watch this. No echo. No echo. Echo. Okay, so let's play a beat. Okay, so I want to increase the number of beats to trigger by. And what's cool about the smooth echo is that it's not only triggered by this crossfader, you can use the channel fader. So check this out. And it'll do an echo out, a really clean and smooth echo out. And let's take a close look at the smooth echo menu. All the triggers that you can use is the crossfader, the channel fader, hot cues. So if you're doing hot cues, it can trigger the echo. It can be triggered by the silent cue, the channel fader as we have it set, the gate cue, and even the load button. So if, say, you wanted to load songs one after another and have each one echo out, you can do that. And what's really cool about the smooth echo is that if you load a different song in a different BPM, the echo of the last song that's echoing, say that 3 times as fast, will adjust in tempo to the new song. Shout out to Cleveland Terry for discovering that. So over here we have the performance pads. As a lot of DJs requested, they wanted independent performance pads per deck, just like how it is on DJ controllers. So now there is independent control of each deck's pads, so you can have roll on one, hot cue on the other. But Pioneer DJ took it a step further and introduce what's called the combo pad. And that's where you can take the primary pad mode functions and have 2 of them on one deck. Right now I have my hot cues on the top and my sampler on the bottom. And to access that, all I had to do was click into hot cue, and hold it and click the other primary function, and it shows up on the bottom. Now I could do that in reverse, where I have the sampler on, and then if I hold it and click hot cue, my hot cues aren't on the bottom. Because of the combo pad mode, you could be in 4 different pad modes at once with just the first 4 pads. So if you have hot cue and sampler here, you could have roll and save looped here. Now the combo pad mode only works with the primary pad mode functions, which are hot cue, roll, save looped, and sampler. The reason for that is because it'll be a little complicated to try to include the secondary pad modes, which you access by holding shift and clicking the pad mode buttons, or the third pad modes, which you access by double clicking the pad mode buttons. So yes, each pad mode has a third function, but we'll get to that in a bit. First, I wanted to talk about the secondary pad mode called Scratch Bank. This is a brand new feature on Serato DJ that's exclusive to the DJM-S11. While the DJM-S11 works with Rekordbox, the Scratch Bank exclusively works only in Serato DJ. And Scratch Bank isn't something you can use in another mixer. Only works with the DJM-S11. So over here in Serato, I have this bank of scratch samples, and it looks a lot like the sampler bank, but it's a totally separate tab. And this appears when you plug in an S11. What Scratch Bank helps you do is, say I had a song on this deck that I'm playing out to the crowd, and then I had a song that I wanted to get ready on this deck. But then I wanted to do a scratch solo to this song. Typically, the ways to do it would be to load a scratch track in there and then try to find and load the song that you had previously. But with Scratch Bank, what it allows you to do is you can access your scratch samples while you're playing, and then once you're done with a scratch routine or a scratch solo, you can go back to the song that you were playing. So let's show you an example. So say I had this song playing on this deck, and then I queue up a different song on the other deck that I might play later. But I decide that while this song is playing, I want to pull up a scratch sample. Well, what Scratch Bank does is it allows you to do that quickly and then go back to the song that you had loaded. So I'm going to go into the Scratch Bank pad mode. And when I click one of the pads, it loads the scratch sample at the cue point that I selected. And now I have a scratch sample on that track. Now you can load up different scratch samples in all the other banks, or you can load up the same scratch sample track and then use a different cue point. And that's pretty much what I did here. I have my fresh on the second pad. Oh, I got smooth echo on. I have "Aw Yeah" right there. And then I have the other "Ah" right here. You have 4 banks, A, B, C, and D, where you could load up to 32 different scratch samples. Now, what's also cool about Scratch Bank is that it's not just exclusive to using it for scratch samples. You can load songs in here. So if you have a performance routine, say you're doing a performance where you're the DJ for a rapper or a singer, you could load them up in the Scratch Bank and do quick mixes with them. I've even talked to some folks who find this useful for mobile DJs. If they have a whole line of requests, they can load it up inside the Scratch Bank just to trigger them. You don't necessarily have to use it for scratching. But yeah, the Scratch Bank is a quick way to access different samples of scratches or different songs very quickly. And when you're done with the Scratch Bank and you want to go back to the song that you previously had loaded, all you have to do is click Shift and click one of the pads, and then it goes back to the song that you had before. Now you want to make sure to hop out and go back to hotkey mode so that you don't accidentally reload another sample from the Scratch Bank. Now, if you're trying to load a new song, you can just overwrite the Scratch Bank sample that you have loaded. And once again, just make sure to click hotkey or any of the other primary functions so you don't accidentally re-trigger the Scratch Bank. Now let's talk about the third pad mode functions of each one of the pad modes. So if you double click hotkey, it turns red. And by the way, these are all color coded, including the third functions, so that you can remember what function you're in. But in hotkey, if you double click it, it turns red. And what that does is that it arms what's called gate cue. If you're ever played on a controller and you have the song stopped, you can trigger the hotkeys momentarily as you click on them or if you hold them down, and they'll stop when you let go. Well, when you're in DVS, you can't really trigger the hotkeys in normal hotkey mode when the track isn't playing. The timecode signal actually has to be playing. And the problem is that it doesn't do what's called a gate function where you can let go of it and it'll stop playing. Well, what gate mode is that it allows you to trigger the hotkey while the timecode is playing, but it only opens up the sound of each hotkey when you're pressing the pad. So gate mode now gives you that internal mode advantage of triggering the hotkeys momentarily, even with a timecode signal. I know I showed this in the last video, but really quick, it's the difference of sounding like this versus sounding like this. And with smooth echo on, now gate Q also allows you to do something else, which is to do a silent Q. So if you have gate Q on and you trigger any of the hot cues, it's now muted. So if you load another song, you can turn up the channel and you won't hear anything. And if you wanna trigger it from a hot cue, you can do it. And to have it keep going, just click hot cue and now it's gate mode off. You might ask, why is this important? Well, a lot of turntable DJs don't have the advantage of the instant play start that CDJs have, where you can just start. The start stop button on a turntable has a wind up time, and it doesn't really give you a real way to be able to start a track and just play it from a dead silence. Before there was silent cue, what some folks would do was set the first hot cue point all the way to the end of the track where it's silent, so that when you trigger any of the other hot cues, it would start immediately without wind up time, like pressing play on a turntable. But by having silent cue or a gate cue, you can do that with the track playing, and it's muted right now, and you can start from any cue point. And so the second function of the roll button is hot cue loops. What hot cue loops are that they will loop whatever you have saved on the hot cues. So say that's my first hot cue, and you can adjust the loop length with the parameter buttons, and then it'll change to a different loop from a different hot cue. On the save loop button, the third function is auto loops on the top with beat jump buttons. The parameter buttons let you scroll through the loop length. So whatever's displaying on Serato 2, 4, 8, and 16, that's what's going to be on the buttons. You got 2, 4, 8, or 16. And these are auto loops, so you can turn them off when you click them again. On the bottom, we got the beat jump buttons. The middle two buttons control the beat jump length. So I can set this to 4 beats. And these outside buttons are the beat jump, going backward or forward. One of the cool things about the beat jump buttons is you can do live edits with them and basically mix and match parts of your track. So check this out. So yeah, and then next we got the transport controls under sampler. And this works when you're in internal mode. And what's awesome about the transport controls is that this makes it possible that you can mix with just the mixer and a laptop without any decks. This button is orange, just like the Q button. So let's... And then this blinking green is the play button. This button over here is the key lock, which I normally leave on. And the second button on the bottom is the sync button. Now these two buttons over here are basically your nudge buttons for temporarily slowing down or accelerating a track. And these two buttons are actually your tempo control buttons that are permanent. It moves faster as you hold it down longer. But basically, that's how you can control the speed of the track right on the mixer. Now, if we change the tempo range to plus minus 16, it moves the tempo a lot faster, so I would recommend using these in plus minus 16. So that's the new performance pad controls. All the third functions of each pad mode is only accessible if you're using Serato. And the features of Gate Q and Scratch Bank are Serato S11 exclusives. That means you can only use it when you're using the S11 with Serato DJ, and it only works in Serato DJ with the S11. Okay, so now let's talk about the upper half of the mixer. Now, before we get to the 4.3-inch touch display, let me lower this. There's a couple things that were improved here. The positioning of the trim, EQ, and color effects knob is now in a singular linear array, so it's easier to find. They're not split. The trim knobs are using a smaller plastic knob on them. There's these rubberized black ones for the EQ and a metallic one for each of the color effects. The load button is bigger than the back button because we made the back button small and the load button bigger so that they're easier to locate without looking at them. So you could be browsing on the screen, which, by the way, when you turn the knob, it automatically opens up the browse view temporarily. And this makes it easier to know which one is the load knob and which one is the back knob, even if you're not looking at the buttons. Some folks have asked, why hasn't Pioneer DJ just made the browse knob when you click it down to be the load? Well, sometimes when you're moving fast, you could accidentally click that down and accidentally load a track when you don't mean to. By keeping it separated, it helps reduce the risk of accidental loads. Another cool thing about the load button is that you can load it to the prepare crate by holding shift and clicking load. And now, instead of loading to the deck, it loads into the prepare crate in Serato. Really useful for pre-building multiple songs before you play it. The loop buttons look familiar, but their default setting is now Serato style. What Serato style is that you can select the loop length and it'll highlight a loop length in Serato. And when you click auto loop, it's the loop that you selected. Now, S9 users might like the way the S9 was set up, where there's a predetermined loop length that the user can set, and that auto loop button will always be that loop length, no matter where you leave the cursor of the loop length. The S9 style actually helps prevent accidentally auto looping when you have it at an awkward loop length, like 1/4. We'll show you how to do that in the settings a little later. So this is the 4.3-inch touchscreen. It's 30 frames per second plus, meaning it could go up to 50 frames per second, depending on how loaded it is, but it default goes not below 30 frames per second. So that way your waveforms look smoother. The brightness can go up to level 5, which on screen, on the camera, is really hard to even read because it gets pretty bright. And there is day mode. The colors are very vibrant with high saturation. So along with being a smooth movement, you're able to tell what the colors are. And by the way, I know it's hard to see on camera, but the vibrance of the colors match the pads and all the other RGB buttons. So one of the things that make the menu of the display really easy to navigate is the fact that there is a small little hamburger icon on the lower right that helps you go back home wherever you are inside the menus. It's something that was borrowed from cell phones, smartphones, just a simple home button that brings you back home. So you don't have to remember that if I twist this knob and hold this button, and if it's blinking, it does one thing, but but if it's not blinking, it does something else. Pioneer DJ simplified the convolution of a complicated user interface by simply adding a home button. So wherever I am, I could be in that page, home, main menu. I could be here, home, main menu. Now I showed you you can get to the browse function by temporarily turning the browse knob, but you can also access it and it'll stay on there from the menu. You can have up to 3 font sizes, and you can even do one line of each track so that it's just one line instead of showing you 2 lines like the way I have it. So I just brought this back to mid, and you can see what it looks like with 2 lines. It has title on the top, artist on the bottom, and then it has your tempo and your key with it color-coded in the Camelot color code right on the right side. Now you can change the sorting order. You can have BPM, you can have song, you can have it by artist, or track number, which is the order that you threw it into the crate. And you can use one finger scrolling to scroll down on the crate. Now we're going to go into effect settings. There are 4 banks of effect settings that you can save, A, B, C, and D. This allows you to save changes that you did, whether it's your color effects or your internal effects. You can save all these combinations in each of these banks. You just have to remember to use the Save Bank button. Over here where it says Filter is where you can change your color effects to something else. So right now I have Filter, but I can have noise just like on the DJM-900 Nexus 2. So if I have... You can also do pitch. And then there's also dub echo. And at the very last, there's wide filter. The difference between the wide filter and the regular filter is the regular filter is actually the classic lush Pioneer filter that you find on a lot of DJM mixers, while the wide filter sounds more like your standard filter that you find on other mixers. So let's listen to that now. This is wide filter. This is Pioneer filter. I like leaving it on the regular filter. One of the things you can do with all 4 of these banks is you could probably even set them so that you have a different color effect for each one. And then to access these banks during a performance is you just hold down Shift, and these left and right buttons on the left and right side of the tap button can let you scroll between each bank. And you don't have to be in this menu to switch banks. So I can be in the waveform view, and it'll tell me right on the lower left it's switching to B, C, D, or A. Now let's talk about the beat effects. In this menu, you can change and control parameters for your hardware beat effects and your software beat effects. By default, there are 6 hardware effects and 6 software effects that you can use. You can only use 1 hardware effect at a time, but you could use up to 6 software effects at a time in combination with 1 hardware effect, giving you a total of 7 beat effects at a time. Now you can even further layer that with a color effect if you really want to get down and dirty by combining different effects. Now the default is there's 6 hardware effects and 6 color effects assigned to these buttons. Now you don't necessarily have to have that. You can actually assign hardware effects to the software effects buttons. So if I wanted to have fader pitch over here, I could change it to fader pitch. So I could have a total of 12 hardware effects that I can select from. And the same goes for the hardware beat effects section. You can switch them to software effects. Now it's only one effect or one combination of effects at a time. So whatever effect or effect combination you have, they will affect both paddles. This keeps the beat effects section simple so you don't forget what effect you were using. Now, like I said earlier, there are features in this mixer that were inspired or even borrowed from the DJM-S11 mixer. There's 22 hardware effects and 7 of them are new. And one of the new effects are, let's switch to bank B. It's called the ducking echo. And the ducking echo, what it is similar to how I described the smooth echo. It initiates itself when you duck the channel, and then it then triggers the echo. But the cool thing about the ducking echo is that when you set the level depth knob to maximum, the ducking echo can create an infinite loop. The reason why it was so popular with the DJM-909 is because the 909 came in just right before the popularization or maybe even the release of Serato DJ. And people were using it when they would play vinyl. And say you were playing a track. And then now I'm going to initiate the ducking echo. It's set to 8 beats. The ducking echo is now looping with itself. I can stop the track. So if this was vinyl, I just created an auto loop with whatever track I was playing. And the ducking echo is also useful for doing echo out similar to the smooth echoes. So say you just had this playing. And I'll bring this to 12, turn it on, and then cut it off. Now I had that at 8 beats. Let's see what it sounds like with 1 beat. 12 o'clock. Now check out this kill effect. I'm gonna set this to 12, and I'm gonna have it's basically a way to use the paddles to cut off the sound. Now here's a feature that I thought was exciting in the fader synths. So we have sine, we have saw. So right now, this is the root note of the saw. When I have this track that's currently loaded playing in there, which should be an F minor. Now, when I load a different song on the opposite deck, which is at F sharp minor, the synth changes key. That's thanks to the auto scale. So how would you use that? Well, the fader synth is just a way to play notes with a synthesizer. So here we go. So another really cool effect is the helix. Here's the helix effects. It's something that you can manipulate the beat length with so that it either speeds up or slows down a little loop section. spiral. It's very similar to the Helix. It creates a loop that does a high pass filter and an echo with it, but then you can manipulate the beat length buttons to make it speed up or slow down. So watch this. It's like a spiral. That's why it's called spiral. Echo out is just a classic easy echo out. It mutes the track so that it just goes into a clean echo out without you even doing any work of shutting off the channel fader. There's now also what's called fader pitch, which allows you to change the pitch of the track using the fader. So I'm gonna set a gate cue on this hot cue, and I'm gonna engage the fader pitch. You can do different scale types like chromatic. And there's different scales that you can use. One of the effect settings that we also have here is the mic echo. And the reason why we have mic echo is because on the DJM-S9, when you engage the mic echo, when you turn the mic echo knob, it starts to control both the level and the beat duration of the echo in one knob instead of just controlling the level. Well, having this mic echo menu here, you can set the beat duration, and then the echo knob in the front is just a level knob for the echo. So you have a more custom control instead of a one knob does all type of setup. Now, these hardware effects are built into the mixer, so you can use them with Rekordbox as well. Touch MIDI is parameters that are important but don't have their own dedicated buttons. There's 4 different banks of touch MIDI, and these buttons and sliders are MIDI mappable, so if you wanted to change what they are, you can remap them to do something else. On bank A, it's your toggle for internal mode, key lock, key up and down. Bank B is all your syncs, your beat sync, your sync off, your key sync, key reset or silent cue. Bank C is some transport controls, your tempo reset, your sync, start or record your save, your library view. And D is just parameters for your internal effects. Now over here we have what's called touch effects, and touch effects is basically a combination of a beat effect and a color effect at the same time, where you can manipulate it using an XY pad. You can toggle each channel on and off, so it can either control both channels or one at a time. In the settings, your presets are either roll and pitch, echo and filter, and there's a button here called hold, and what hold does is that wherever you leave it, where you leave your finger, is where it's going to hold the effect. I usually keep that off so I don't accidentally leave the effect running. Now in the selected effects is where you can custom make your own touch effects. So whatever is on your beat effects that you chose, and mind you, this is only hardware effects, it will affect the horizontal axes. And then on the vertical, it's whatever you set your color effects to. So right now I have it to filter, but if I switch that to noise or to dub echo, that can be a dub echo instead. So using the roll and pitch, let's try this. How about echo and filter? So basically, it's just a way to control two effects at a time using an XY axis on the screen. Now let's talk about deck 3 and 4. The way this mixer is set up is that it is a 4-channel mixer. You can actually offload tracks to the outside decks 3 and 4. It's actually in controller style, which is 3, 1, 2, 4, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you wanted to play tracks on those decks, you actually can. The controls are on the touchscreen. It's not that you can put 4 turntables or 4 CDJs and control all the 4 decks. In Serato, you can only use 2 CDJs or 2 turntables at a time, and they're mainly controlling deck 1 and 2. Deck 3 and 4 can be controlled with the touchscreen. You can load tracks there and then play them, but there's actually a reason why they're there. Deck 3 and 4, you can toggle them each side. If you looked, I had them in 2 different modes. So here are the different screen selections for each deck. They're simple, which shows you your browse, sync, your loop, hotkey, a mute, and a play button. Your hotkey, which shows you all 8 hotkeys on the deck. Your mixer mode, which lets you control your trim or your crossfader. And the mode that I usually leave it on is called mashup. And I do that for both decks. What this mixer allows you to do is you can take a track that's playing on deck 1 and move it to deck 4, or take a track that's playing to deck 2 and move it to deck 3. Now you might ask, why doesn't it just move it to the deck that's next to it? Well, there's a reason why, and we'll show you a little later. But the movement of the deck is this function called deck move. And it's always deck 1 to deck 4 and deck 2 to deck 3. If you're playing a track and you want to just offload it to another deck so that you can get something else ready on your 2 primary decks, you can do that. Now there's this other function called dual deck. What dual deck does is that if you have a track in the virtual deck, when you engage dual deck, the CDJ or turntable that's next to it, which is this one, will control both decks. Let me say that again. When you engage dual deck on, say, deck 4, it will lock the control of that deck with the timecode or HID signal of the primary deck right here. So if you took an instrumental and you had an acapella here and you did a deck move and dual deck is engaged, your instrumental and your acapella will behave like they're one song. And the cool thing about deck move is that it retains your trim and your EQ settings. So if your instrumental is set at a specific spot, you can move it to the other deck and it'll retain all those settings. It won't retain the color effect settings. But once you do a deck move and dual deck is engaged, everything from your trim, EQ, color effects, performance pads will now affect both decks simultaneously. So I did this example for AGI Pro DJ. I apologize, it's a really cheesy song by Justin Bieber, where I took an instrumental and I synced it with the acapella to Baby. And basically I did a deck move, and you can manipulate both decks as one track. And I key shifted it so we don't get in trouble, but here we go. So I'm going to engage dual deck. Now I'm going to move this to deck 4. And now they're playing together. And watch this. Both decks are manipulated by this jog wheel. EQ, everything, even hot cues. And by the way, you want to set up your hot cues if you're going to do dual deck routines. where the same hot cue points on both songs will sync the track, or at least just a couple of them, so that way you always have a spot where you can, in case they drift, you can put them together. Don't be afraid to use the sync function. I think it's kind of necessary to do a deck move so you don't have drifting. So I have this playing, we're gonna pitch this up, pitch Justin Bieber up, and I'm gonna go into my touch MIDI, do a beat sync. Okay, cool. And then we'll fast forward. I'm gonna keep this quiet so we don't get in trouble. Engage dual deck, do a deck move. These are now together. So I'm gonna load a different track here. I'm gonna do a key sync. And what we could do now is we could start playing the next song like we're playing off one song here because they're all controlled together. But we're gonna do something more fun. Now watch this, deck move. I switched the instrumental of that track. Now I'm gonna turn off dual deck so I can control the acapella by myself. Now that other track is playing on that virtual deck. Now you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with dual deck and deck move. You can lock together an instrumental and an acapella on one side and another instrumental and an acapella on the other side, and you can juggle 4 decks. Something Jay Espinoza mentioned is that he will offload an instrumental to one deck and then take 2 acapellas and then juggle those to the beat that's playing. This feature is a first time on a battle mixer, and it's exclusive to only using it with Serato DJ with the S11. And if you didn't catch it by now, this is why this screen select mode is called Mashup. Now, of course, I've already showed it to you. We have our waveform screen, which shows our waveforms, where you can see the colorful Serato waveform right on the screen. Now, with all these exclusive features to Serato DJ, are there any advantages with using Rekordbox? Well, there are features on Rekordbox that aren't available on Serato DJ. You got the cloud library sync, the recommended tracks, the playlists that you use to export to CDJs can be the same playlist that you use in performance mode. But let me open Rekordbox and show you one of the coolest advantages to using the DJM-S11 when you have the CDJ-3000s. See, on the CDJ-3000s, you can go into HID mode instead of using a time code. And you can use the 9-inch screen on the 3000s to also scroll through your library, so you can leave this on waveform view. But what's also awesome is that you have the waveform of the track inside Rekordbox right here on your 9-inch screen, and it's at 60 frames per second. So you'll see it over here and over here. And what's even cooler is you can switch the waveform type from blue to RGB, which also changes on the DJM-S11. But on the 3000s, you can get 3-band waveform as well. It only shows up as the blue waveform on the DJM-S11. With having 3 screens, you have all these advantages. You can have these in waveform, and you could be on your touch MIDI or touch effects on the DJM-S11 screen. Or you could be browsing over on the CDJ-3000 while you have the mixer showing the waveforms. Now here's another thing. The hotkey buttons on the CDJ-3000s are dedicated to hotkeys only. But on the mixer, instead of having hotkeys, because you already have hotkeys on the CDJs, you could have them in other pad modes. You could completely have all 16 sampler banks open and still have access to all 8 of your hot cues on each deck. That's a lot of control that you have at your fingertips. Now let's talk about the sound quality for a second. So the specs are, it does 64-bit dithering and mixing. The output is 32-bit, not 24. And you know what? I could list the specs all day, but what does this mean? This has a very studio quality flatness to the frequency response. Classically, the S9 kind of had just a little bump in the bass and just a little roll off at the top end. And the goal for this mixer was to make it sound as close to the DJM-900 Nexus 2 as possible. And honestly, it's a lot closer to the DJM V10. From 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, if you do a frequency sweep on it, it is very, very flat with no odd number distortions spiking in between them. The response is not muddy. Some people have even said that they can hear it on their studio monitors when they first put on this mixer, including from the booth output. And there's a lot more sparkle to it because the frequencies don't roll off at the top end. It's pretty flat from 20 to 20 kilohertz. And that's what the 64-bit mixing and dithering in the DSP engine is doing. It's a very low distortion, really low noise, and accurate frequency response. The phono preamps on these are really good. Sometimes folks say that their mixer doesn't sound good when you play actual vinyl. Some folks have said that the -3 decibel default on the mixer is good enough to play using their Ortophons or their Shure needles with regular vinyl. And it's not muddy, it's very crystal clear. The phono preamps are definitely an upgrade from the previous mixer. I wish I could show you, but other than a bunch of scratch records, I don't have any vinyl. But look out for the other reviews as they come out when other users start using it with actual records. Now there's a misconception between signal strength and sound quality, and sometimes people confuse the two. Some folks will say, I like mixer A better than mixer B because mixer A has better sound quality. I was like, what's great about its sound quality? Well, it's louder. Well, louder and clarity are two different things. This mixer is definitely improved when it comes to clarity. Now, what does that mean about the sound output? Well, if you turn off the peak limiter in the utility settings, you'll actually get a boost in volume, but you'll also have the risk of clipping if you go past the 0 dB of the mixer's output. When the peak limiter is on the master output, it actually lowers the volume just by a little bit to give itself a little bit of headroom in case there's any spikes that go past the threshold of the limiter so that it prevents it from clipping. So when the limiter is on, there's actually a little bit of reduction in volume. But that reason is so that we can prevent it from clipping. But if the sound engineer really wants to pump the most volume out of this mixer, all they have to do is turn off that peak limiter. Now, we were talking about settings that are in the utility. So when you're on in the main menu, there's this cogwheel on the top right, and there's these utility menu options. And a lot of these were only available on the S9 using the settings utility app that is installed when you install the driver. Now you can control some of these parameters, most of these parameters, on the touchscreen. So we'll go one by one. There's performance, which is your crossfader, loop options, pad mode options, load options, fader start. So your crossfader controls classically was in the driver app, the settings utility. You can control set your cut lag distance, which is the distance between full on and off from the edge of the crossfader right here. I always have it set to 5. And just like on the S9, you had crossfader smoothing settings, and what was on there was none, small, and large. But there's this new one called Sharp, and Sharp is a specific smoothing curve that is modeled after classic turntableless mixers. It's like the most favored crossfader curve for scratch DJs from the late 90s, early 2000s. So I'm going to put my crossfader in hamster mode, and I'm just going to... This might not be too apparent on YouTube, but let's run through these crossfader smoothing settings. So this is none. This is small. This is large. Let's do that again. Large has a more smooth attack. It's not so snappy. There's none. Small. Large. Now let's try sharp. Now let's go through all four. None. Small. Large. See, back in the day, as I mentioned in the last video, mixers were like treated like instruments, and different mixers with different scratch DJs were like different guitars or like different musical instruments. And sometimes people will choose a specific mixer just because the curve smoothing, the way the curve is shaped when it's cutting, is different from another, and they can sound completely different from the way they scratch. And these are what these settings are. You can digitally control and change the Crossfader smoothing setting. Now we're gonna go to loop options. Now loop options is what I mentioned earlier, where you have the Serato style looping, which is when you have it off, or you can have the S9 style, where you can predetermine a loop length, and no matter where you have it in Serato, like let's say I'll have it all the way down to 1/32, when I press auto loop with the loop option on, it will still always go to 16 because that's what I set it to be predetermined as. I like the Serato style. I leave that one off. I got used to it because I use a controller. So if you're coming from the S9, you might want to turn this on. If you're coming from a controller, just leave it off. Pad mode options. Now, to get to the different pad modes, normally you would be using the shift button to get to the secondary and double click to get to the third options. Well, for a lot of battle DJs, when they want quick access to different secondary pad modes, they have the multi on so that they can use double clicks and double taps to get to those secondary pad modes. Now, we have third pad modes that have double clicks. So how would we reach the secondary pad mode if we wanted to do that? Well, there's the single click to get to the primaries. There's the double click to get to the thirds, which is my gate cue here. And if you do a triple click, it'll get to the secondary where you would normally use the pitch. So now I'm in pitch play. So if I wanted sampler, click once. If I wanted the transport controls, click twice. And if I want scratch bank, click 3 times. Like I said, Red Bull 3 style DJs, battle DJs like using the multi over having the shift, just so that they can one-hand it if they're using the other hand for any other function. But we'll leave it to shift because I like using shift. So there's also load options. Load options, what this does is that when you load a track, it'll automatically scroll to the next track. So you don't have to scroll, click load, scroll, click load. It'll just automatically load the next track. And this can be really useful when you use it with smooth echo, if you want to do lazy loading. And every time I click load, the smooth echo will engage and it will lock to the BPM of the next song. So say I have a track going. Now load. Now load. Now load. Now load. You can completely quick mix just simply by tapping load. You just have to set your first hot cue in spots where you want it to start right away. Now, even with smooth echo off, the loading options where it'll scroll to the next track, This makes previewing tracks really easy. You could just load, 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 load if you're going through a whole crate if you need to listen to them. If you're a mobile DJ, that's a really quick way if you're in a sequence in the night where you have to bring songs out really fast. Now, this is another option to do that. While I mentioned earlier, Scratch Bank is one way to do that. So there's load options, there's fader start. Fader start is borrowed from not only the DJM-909, but the first DJM mixer, the DJM-300, had fader start. And what that is the ability to use the crossfader to press play on a CDJ. So all you had to do was click over. So say I had it set to hot queue, and I had the track in internal because say we're simulating using a CDJ in HID mode. Track playing. So when you move the crossfader, nothing happens. But when you hold shift and move the crossfader, it can start the track. It brings back the ability to fader start just like on the classic DJM mixers, including the DJM-909. Back in the day, when the early CDJs before the 1000 didn't have a scratchable jog wheel, I used to use the fader start to do stuff like this. All right, so that's the performance utility menu. Let's go to display. Well, waveform contents. This just allows you to toggle on and off if you can see the sync and key lock button. So if I turned off sync and key lock and the effects display, when I'm in waveform mode, I now have a longer waveform because I don't have the key lock and sync up here and the effects down below. You can still touch it to go back to your main menu, but I'm gonna put those back on because I use them. The waveform overlay, you can have it show your pad mode display for when you're at different pad modes. You can have beat countdown or bar countdown and your status of your decks to show. Waveform touch functions. This means you can touch the waveform and it can do specific functions, or you could just keep that off. You can use it to nudge or bend the waveform, the playing track, or you can use it to perform a deck move. You can also turn on needle search so you can scrub through the waveforms through the entire track. I keep it on deck move. Your browse display, you have 3 different font sizes. So this is what it looks like in font size small, and large looks like this. I like keeping it small so I can see the whole thing. I showed you the browse auto transition already. This is where you can control that, which just allows you to, after you load a track, it automatically scrolls to the next track down. Now, the 1-line, 2-line, you can either split the title and artist to 2 lines, or the whole thing can show up in 1 line. So this is what it looks like on 1 line. If you have long tracks like me, where it says Priyan Joni remix of so-and-so remix, and this is the name of the track featuring blah, 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 it can get really, really long. So I prefer having 2 lines on. Screen settings, this is where you can brighten or darken your screen, switch it to day mode. And outside display, next we have the microphone settings. We got mic talkover. There's 2 different talkover algorithms. There's normal and there's advanced. And the talkover dB, you can set -6, -18, -12, -24 dB. There is a low-cut filter, also known as a high-pass filter, which allows you to cut the lower bass end of the microphone. About 80 hertz and below is cut off, and the reason for that is so that way you don't have as much low rumble feedback coming from the subwoofers. Sometimes feedback doesn't cause squeals, it's sometimes from the low end. Microphone output, you can allocate to turn off the microphone to the booth to reduce feedback, and it only comes out of the mains. And even you can turn it off to the record. So when you're recording in Rekordbox or Serato, the microphone doesn't record. So if you're on a live stream and you're talking on the mic, but you're giving shout outs, but you don't want it to be on your audio recording because you're gonna upload it to Mixcloud and nobody wants to hear you give a birthday shout out, you can turn off the microphone from being recorded into the DJ software. Now, while I mentioned that, here's another cool thing you can do with this mixer. If you have another computer, you can multi-track record what comes out of Crossfader A, Crossfader B, and the microphone in separate tracks. So that means all your cutting, and this is all your effects included, all your cutting, all the things you do per channel, and including the microphone, can be separated tracks so you can redo the mix down after the fact on Ableton or whatever DAW you're using. So if you had a live performance where the mic was too loud or if it was too quiet, you could fix that in post. If you had a live performance where you messed up your scratching, you might be able to fix that as well or redo it and punch it in. I'm gonna get a lot of haters for that comment. All right, so mic output, mic limiter, and there's one separate for the master and the booth output. This keeps the volume level of your mic to a certain peak so that it doesn't distort if you have a mic cupper kind of MC, or if you are a mic cupper, or if somebody just likes to scream into the mic. This keeps it from distorting and also controlling the volume level so that the quiet parts are brought up a little bit while the loud parts are brought down so that it's a more even output. There's a mic limiter here. Now next we're going to go into the mixer settings. Phono attenuation, you can lower or raise the attenuation for the phono inputs. You can give them more gain or give them less gain. Sometimes when people complain that a record is just too quiet, you can boost it. If your control record is too quiet, you can boost it. And also, of course, you can cut it. You can switch your EQs to an EQ style or an isolator style, which gives it a full kill. EQ style gives it -26. And they're independent per channel. So if you want one EQ and one isolator, you can do that as well. Auxiliary input has an option for a 12 decibel boost. If you have a friend who's playing on a controller, an entry-level controller with a weak output, you can boost that weak output with a 12 decibel boost. If you have a guitar effects module or an instrument that you have plugged into the auxiliary, you can give it a 12 decibel boost. The master output, you can attenuate it -6, -12, or a 0 dB. Like I said earlier, you have the peak limiter here. If you have a sound engineer who knows what they're doing, this can be turned off. You can even switch it from mono to stereo right over here. And there's a separate menu for the booth. No peak limiter for the booth output, but there is also an attenuation control so that you can lower it if needed. Other settings, the auto standby, which means when the mixer hasn't been used and it's still on, it goes into a sleep mode. Your LED brightness of all your LED lights, not the screen. The LEDs, like the pads and the buttons, can be controlled here. PC utility, if you turn that on, the settings utility will automatically open in the computer when you plug the mixer. Settings lock allow an engineer to be able to lock settings so nobody can mess with it if a DJ wants to get a little too gung-ho in a setup that's not his. I leave it unlocked because this is my mixer. Factory reset resets all the settings. Now, what's also cool is that in the settings utility is that you can save your effects that you save into the mixer also over here, which allow you to be able to take your computer, go to a different club and play on a DJM-S11 that's not yours, and automatically be able to have all your settings ready to go as if it was your mixer. You have to remember that when you're creating your different effects banks, that you also save it into your computer. Now on the back of the mixer, it's almost identical to the DJM-S9 except for two new little things. There's two USB ports in addition to the ones that are going out to the computers or out from the computers. There's two USB-A ports that are essentially a USB hub. What this allows users to do is if you have two CDJs that are in HID mode, instead of having to connect them on a separate hub from the computer USB, and moving from one computer to another, you have to take that hub mid-set and move it to the other computer. It's basically set on the mixer. When you switch the input selector from one computer to another, the USB port on that side switches to the other computer. The hub is just a hub, so if you wanted to put a hard drive in there, which I don't recommend, you can put a hard drive there. And the reason why I don't recommend it is if you switch the input selector switch, it switches to the other computer without ejecting it from this one. And you don't want that to happen. You can use it for accessories. If you had a DDJ XP2, you can plug it in there. And what's cool is the person on the other computer could use it as well, because when you switch, it switches to the other laptop. You can even use other gear with it. So if you have media players that are Serato accessories, you can plug them in there. It also provides enough power to power a phase device. So let me illustrate how easy this USB hub makes life. So say I had an S9, this S11 was an S9, and I wanted to use HID mode, and the DJ playing after me also wanted to use HID mode. So I have my USB port for accessing the mixer in Serato connected, but I have to take the CDJs, put them on a separate USB hub, and then I'm going to plug them on one computer. And then I'm going to set up my HID, set that to deck 1, set this to deck 2. So I'm playing along, I'm playing HID. Now this guy wants to play in HID. Well, what I would do is switch this channel so that it's set to his deck on the right side. And then while I'm playing on this CDJ, while it's playing, I have to take this USB and bring it on over here. Well, I would need a dongle because that's USB Type-C over there. And this is basically how it was done with the S9 and 2 CDJs. Well, the awesome thing about having the hub is you don't ever have to do that ever again when you're using the DJM-S11. That awkward mid-set movement of the hub is eliminated because all you have to do is have the CDJs plugged into the hub. And when you switch to another computer, that USB on that side will switch to the other computer. Now you have to just go back into your source and set your HID deck, which isn't really that hard to do. But you don't have to go do the awkward thing of switching from one to another. See, one of the mistakes that happens when you switch a hub is somebody will accidentally forget and put their Serato USB into there, and when they unplug it, their computer dies down and music just stops. Serato is on a separate connection on the computer, and that's how it's been on the S9, with two USBs that go to the computer. But when you're using the CDJs, it's on a separate single hub, but now there's a dual computer hub right here where you can use it at one computer at a time. No more awkward moving from one computer to another when you want to use HID mode. Right now with the CDJ3000, HID mode isn't supported, but if you have CDJ2000 Nexus 2s or any of the Serato HID compatible CDJs, this hub will make your life easier, especially when you're at a club sharing your set with other DJs. So yeah, this is the DJM-S11 Battle Mixer. It's 4 channels on the inside, 2 channels on the outside. It has an easy to use touchscreen with deck controls for deck 3 and 4. There's a new layout for the performance pads that takes independent pad mode one step farther with combo pad mode. There's new effects, and there's the heart of the DJM-909 living inside this mixer. Like I said in my last video, this mixer is an instrument for the creative DJ, mix artist, or scratch DJ. Later on this week, on October 22nd, I'm going to be talking about the DJM-S11 more in depth on the happy hour show for Pioneer DJ USA. It's going to be on the Pioneer DJ USA Twitch channel and Facebook page. It's at 4 p.m. PDT. And on the 23rd, I'm going to be on DJ Kova's show, and I'm going to be joining Cleveland Terry and Mojax to talk about the DJM-S11. Be sure to find DJ Kova on Twitch this Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I know I just went from Pacific Time to Eastern Time, but I'm giving you the local times of the host of each one of the shows. Anyways, if you got any questions, comments, or anything to add about the DJM-S11 that I didn't cover here in this video, please leave them in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts, answer any questions, or learn anything new that I haven't tried out yet on this mixer. I'm going to leave product links for the DJM-S11 down in the comments below. If you're looking for a payment plan that is the easiest to qualify for online, be sure to check out the links from Zounds. They have one of the best payment programs out there if you want to pick up an S11 today. If you like this video, please smash that like button. And if it's your first time here and you found this video useful, please click that subscribe button. And don't forget to click that little bell icon so you get a notification the next time I upload a video. Don't forget to add me on Instagram, where I share content that I don't normally share on my YouTube channel, or I do some sneak peeks of my upcoming videos on. Follow me there on Instagram, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Take care and stay healthy.